is not structured the same as in person. So normally it would be definitely more collaborative discussion, hands-on activities. But for today, I ask that you be patient with the internet and technology because sometimes, we lose our connection and have to log back in. I have some sites I want to go to, so it takes me a little bit to switch and share the screen. So just be patient and we'll make it work. I do know that some of you like to watch the presenter and kind of with the slides. Unfortunately, my camera does not work on my laptop. IT fixed it and then it just stopped working again. So you will not get to see me. There's a photo there of me if you need to see that. So I do apologize because I do know that's important to some people. So here we go. My email is on here if you need to email me. That's the best way to get a hold of me. It does take me 2 or 3 days sometimes to respond because right now my schedule is just very busy. All right, so collaboration and reflection. Normally in my presentations, we would be in groups, interacting, sharing out, doing hands-on activities. But for today, if you have a paper and pencil around, that will be great. There's going to be some opportunities for reflection. There's some things you might want to write down. If you happen to have a student file, an IEP by you, that would even be great because as we're talking about things, you can self-reflect and say, hey, oh yeah, I'm doing that right, or oh, I kind of missed that. We also have the chat box. With 20 of us, it probably won't be a problem. Just go ahead, type in the chat box your question. And at an appropriate break or anytime, Ez can just say, hey, Barbara, we've got a question, and then we'll go back and we'll answer that question. One thing I want to say about your questions is you might not like my answer. It might not be something our COE is currently doing. It might be future trainings. Sometimes, we practice based on what we've been taught. And there's always sharing of ideas. So I'm going to share some information and it might be new stuff. It might be stuff that you've been doing for years. So we'll just kind of go through it and see how it plays out. So our agenda for the next hour-ish, and kind of see how this plays out, is first, I do incorporate a lot of pictures and less text in my PowerPoints because we remember usually visually in chunks. So I'm starting with the law, not the law on transition plans, but the law in terms of assessments within transition plans. Talk about that a little bit. Oop, there's my mouse. Then we're going to talk about the meat of assessments. What is it you're assessing? So I kind of went with a flower theme because everything is really intertwined and they build on each other. Assessments are not just one component, just like math, just like English, right? We're assessing various areas in developing a transition plan. So we'll be talking about that. And lastly, probably the part everybody just wants is the assessments. What assessments do I give? Where's those resources? I do have some resources that are free. I have some that you can purchase. Most of them are free, and the links to all of them. I'm trying to figure out how to change my slide, sorry. All right, our learning objectives, right? Why we're doing this. At the end of this presentation, participants will be able to, hopefully, articulate the key components of law surrounding transition assessments, develop skills to write a transition assessment report, understand the importance of cultural competence in transition planning, develop skills to connect person-centered plans to assessments, differentiate between the different types of transition assessments, and locate appropriate transition materials and resources. Okay, so those are all the areas we're going to be covering and hopefully what your takeaway is. I always like to start with the presenter lens. And this is where if you have a piece of paper, you can write down your own lens, right? Because you're a participant. You're coming into this with your own views, your own beliefs, and your own background and your own experiences. So when we hear a presentation and people share, they're always coming at it with their own biases, right? Their own views. And so here are mine, all right? Feminist, female, woman. I am Generation X. I turned 50 last year. I have a doctorate and it's mostly focused on research in transition, students going to college with autism, students with intellectual disabilities accessing community college and their success. I'm a certified equity trainer and have my CLAD certificate, and that's important because we're going to be talking about how those things are embedded a little bit later. I have credentials in moderate severe OI, TBI, and assistive technology. So those things are all kind of more around low incidence, right? But really supporting our students with more moderate severe. This is my 26th year. I started teaching after my son was born. And I've taught at 3 separate districts, which again broadens your lens. Some people have only taught in one district, maybe at 1 grade level. I taught middle school RSP. I taught middle school and high school ED. I helped develop and start an additional adult transition program. And I currently cover the vocational programs for the county, working with districts across our county in our TPP program and our other workability and grant programs, right? So I'm coming to you with this presentation with this in kind of my suitcase, the lens in which I'm going to talk about things. And of course, when I say something, it's based on, here's an example when I was working with my students, and you could have an example that might be similar, it might be totally opposite. You work in a different geographical area, your experiences might be different, and that's okay. All right, any questions so far? Okay.
I think so.
That's one of the things about webinars. When you tell a joke or you ask a question, there's like this long pause. It's like, is anybody still there? All right, so we're going to start with the law, and we're going to start with kind of the foundation. And if you ever bought anything from IKEA, right, there's no directions. And I kind of consider the law the foundation and the directions to what you're supposed to be doing. Sometimes people just go and do an IEP and it's really not based on any research or data or anything. And sometimes it works because nobody really checks it. Sometimes a parent, an advocate, a lawyer comes in and it's like, nope, here's the directions. You didn't follow the directions. So I always like to start there and then build up. I could easily just say, here's 7 websites, go to these websites and there's assessments, but you're not going to know what to do with the assessments. You're not going to know how to implement them. You're not going to be able to look at the big picture. So I want to start, kind of build the big picture, and then end with the assessments. All right, so what is an ITP, right? By law, a student needs to have one by age 16. Most of us know this. It is getting younger and younger. I will tell you, most across the state, it's really starting to trickle down to 14. This is kind of the most growing area, is what's happening to our students once they graduate, and starting those plans earlier. This goes back to equity, it goes back to access, making sure our students have inclusive practices at high schools, getting into CTE classes, things like that. Specialized section of the IEP that specifically outlines the students' transition goals and services, right? It's a roadmap. So the ITP is like a separate section to the IEP, but as the student gets older, it becomes the primary section. It really guides everything else. I really like this quote at the end: a truly successful transition process is the result of comprehensive team, make sure that's important, team planning that is driven by the dreams, desires, and abilities of youth. A transition plan provides the basic structure for preparing an individual, I should say life, work, and play in the community as fully independently as possible, right? And that's going to look different for a student who's going to college, for a student who is going to a trade school, for a student who is going to an adult day community, or going to competitive integrated employment, right? We're going to look at each student individually. All right, so I don't, when you're not the main host, you can't do the polls. So I kind of switch these to like little quizzes. ITPs must meet how many, if somebody wants to take a guess or put it in the chat, criteria established by the NTAC on transition. Does anybody know how many criteria there are in a transition plan? And I'm not looking at the chat, so as if you could read that to me.
I will. It's quiet still. Also, just reminding the participants, you may unmute yourself anytime a question is asked. So
you can shout out a number.
Val put in education, vocational, and independent living.
I'm looking for a number.
Susan Sheehan put in 4.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Anyone else? Any guesses?
Val said 4 as well.
Whoops. All right, here we go. There are 8. So there was no Starbucks gift card winner for the first quiz.
I just really want to remind people on the transition page, you guys check these off every time you write a transition and either hopefully say yes to all of them.
Okay, and we're going to get there. All right. So the components of an ITP, right? There are 8 components for that the national has the guidelines were. So we're going to only talk about 3 today. We are not talking about how to write a defendable transition plan. We are just talking about how those assessments play in, and the assessments are the first step. So if we look at all 8, just so you know, student must be involved in the process. That's why I have it in red. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. 2, if appropriate, agreed upon, invite agencies working with students. 3, assessments must be age appropriate. And 4, assessments must cover all 3 domains. And we're going to talk about that, okay? And then the other components must have post-secondary long-term goals, must have annual short-term goals, must include a course of study, must have service to address goals. Okay, so now you do know. And at the end of the, like as said, the transition plan, there's a bunch of boxes where it says, did you do this? Yes, no, right? And you should be checking, yes, I did these things. All right, student participation. And here's the law that goes with it. I always do like to try to include that so people don't think it's my personal opinion or the district's personal opinion. The LEA shall invite the child with a disability to attend his or her IEP meeting if the purpose of the meeting will be consideration of the post-secondary goals and transition services needed to assist the child in reaching those goals. If the child does not attend the IEP meeting, the LEA must take other steps to ensure that the child's preferences and interests are considered. The only time the child probably or student, young adult would not be there is maybe they're in the hospital, right? Or maybe something came up at the very last minute and they had a field trip or there was something going on. They had the chicken pox. For the most part, even Annabelle, I'll refer to your students, right? Your students might be living in a group home. They might have conservatorship. Mom's participating by phone. They got care workers. The student should still be coming to the room and taking part for at least part of the IEP meeting. It is their meeting, okay? So it doesn't mean they have to stay for the whole meeting. And I will tell you that right now, in one of our grant programs, we have a student who is an RSP student, and mom is telling her son that he does not need to come to his exit IEP. She's got it. So that's kind of the other end of the spectrum, right? When you start to run into student-parent conflict and the student is starting to become age of majority, it is their IEP meeting and parents have a different plan. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit later too. But just so you know, the student, we talk about compliance, procedural issues. When you do the meeting notice, right? If there's a due process, one of the first things they check is on the meeting notice, was the student invited? So make sure that that box is checked. And then in the IEP, you're checking that the student was in attendance. These are their assessments, right? You need their input and their participation. And we're going to talk about how to get their participation. Okay, so on the, if you use SACE, not everybody uses SACE across the country, but if you use SACE, it looks like this. Describe how the student participated in the process. This box right here that I have in red needs to be checked. That is a compliance issue, right? And then did you do these things on the assessment, an interview, an inventory, a questionnaire? It doesn't have to be all 3 of those. It could be one of those. It could be 2. It could be all 3. But the first box must be checked, okay? Because it's, if they didn't participate, how did you do an assessment on them? Make sense? Everyone nods their heads. All right. And jump in with questions if I'm going too fast. All right. Assessments, transition assessments, an ongoing process. It's ongoing of collecting data on the individual needs, preferences, and interests as they relate to the demands of current future work, education, independent living, and community involvement, including social assessments. Mental health is the #1 issue across services for the Department of Rehab, across college disability support services right now, making sure that if a student needs mental health, that is documented and implemented and part of the transition plan if needed. Assessments are not one slice of the pie. An assessment needs to be the whole pie. Okay, it's a lot of things, and we're going to talk about those. Sometimes people think it's just one thing. It's just, I'm going to assess what college they want to go to, or I'm just assessing what career they want to go to. No, it's a lot more than that. All right, the requirements of an assessment. Here is one resource for you, ONET, Interest Profiler. There's the link for it. Here's what it looks like. It's got some little faces there to help the students select. So if you were doing it with a student, you could read the sentence with them and then help them figure out their answers and get the report. 60 questions for that one. All right, assessments must be age appropriate. Chronological age, not developmental age, can be modified at their independent level. They must cover all 3 domains, right? Post-secondary education training, post-secondary employment, independent living. And when you see your IEP, it says when applicable, right? And it says that for the community. So I will tell you in 8th grade, you would just probably focus on, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, these 2. When the older the student gets, the more important the community engagement piece and the independent living piece become. You should truly be writing goals and assessing in these areas. When we start to see, we're seeing more and more due process cases on transition plans, specifically on not writing goals, because you're going to need to be assessing in these areas just like you would in every area of disability that's suspected, right? So for transition planning, you really need to focus on the areas of the student. The last thing you want to do is go to due process and have some concerns have come out about the student being able to do something and you never assessed it. You never took into the fact that the student had a certain low incidence disability per se, right? You only focused on maybe college or you focused on employment. You have to take in all these things. And I'm going to give you some resources to be able to do that. All right. Have you ever written a transition assessment report? This is where you share out. It's a yes/no question. You can unmute. You can type in.
Yes.
We have a yes.
We have 2 yeses.
Okay.
No.
Okay, so we have a majority of no, but we have 2 yeses.
Yes, that's right.
Awesome. Okay.
We got a maybe too.
We got a maybe. Not sure if I've written one. All right. Well, that's awesome. All right. Here we go. Assessment reports. Not every, and I will tell you, there's different types of assessment reports because when you do transition planning, you don't necessarily need a assessment plan, right? If you are doing, if a student has, is in high school, they're taking a transition class, they're, let's say, an RSP student, or you're already doing career awareness 30 minutes twice a week in your adult transition class, and all the students are participating in something, you do not need an assessment plan for that, okay? This is something a little different. The assessment reports, this is the current recommendations. That doesn't mean across the state, every LEA is doing it. And I could not tell you myself if RCOE is doing that, okay? So this is a section I'm just gonna throw out there, and if you're doing it, great. If you're not doing it, you probably should, and if we need to do professional development on it, we will. Ed code, okay, the personnel who assist the pupil shall prepare a written report or reports as appropriate of the results of each assessment. So a psychologist might be also giving some transition assessments. It might be built into some tests they give, and they include it. You as the teacher should also be giving some assessments. The very first time, maybe at age 16, or if sometimes a parent requests it a little bit earlier, or there's a need to do it earlier, the very first transition plan, there should be a assessment report, okay? And then from there on, it should be every 3 years is where you're doing the, just like you would a try, you would do a more formal assessment report. Okay, so yearly you're sharing out, you're updating it, just like you kind of do with the Sandy, right? And then at the try, you would actually have more of a formal report that was part of an assessment plan. Okay, it's going to have the background of the student, the history of assessment. So let's say it's 3 years later and it's the second one, it would have some previous results there. Details what was administered and the outcomes of it, the behaviors of the student during the assessment, and then the recommendations of that. I am going to show you a sample one. I'm going to attempt to anyway. So give me just a second. And I think I can do this. Bam. All right, do you guys see it? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just
All right. All right. That's okay. All right. So here's a sample transition assessment report, and you guys have access to this. So for those of you who are saying yes, hopefully your report looks similar to this. For those who have never seen a report, now you have an example of one. Okay. If RCOE, I will say, is using this in the future, if they're currently using it, we would want to make sure our template is the same across the board. The information would be different, but we would want to use the similar template. All right, so this has the student, right? It's all hypothetical, the date of the reports, date of the report, the background of the student, right? It tells you his age. And then here's where it talks about this student is in high school. He's a 12th grader. So he's going to have had some formal assessments in the past, right? Since the student start of high school, Tony has shown an interest in the field of study and career that is based on problem solving and math relating to engineering, right? That came from some assessment. He has strengths and desires to work with others, creativity. And so here's the results, right? They're kind of reviewing each one. Why is this important? Because when you go to due process, and remember, this is the number one thing going on right now is going to due process over transition plans, is there's no record of what was done to support the student, right? And this is how you're capturing that data, right? The student wanted this in 2015. In 2016, I did this. In 2017. So sometimes in our special ed, especially our more moderate severe, one teacher has a student for 4 years, right? You can't give that same assessment necessarily all 4 years, right? You got to mix it up. The student changes. You have to look at the course of study. Where's that student at now? What are the new needs of assessment? Is the student switching from engineering to math, right? You want to be able to document that to say you're really covering the student's interests. Okay, let me go down a little bit further. So they added the goals in here, what he's been doing. Transition assessments. These are the assessments the student took that year, right? He was provided the independent living goal worksheet. And based on that, boom, this is the results of it. Most transition assessments are subjective, right? The student's giving themselves a score. It's a self-rating. It's a questionnaire. Based on their results, they're into what career pathway, right? These are their strengths based on the choices they picked, right? So it's not, it's very subjective and it can change year to year. Okay, if you give it to 8th grade, maybe you're going to interview the parent. Maybe the student has moderate to severe. You're looking at what the parent says. There's lots of parent surveys, right? You can put that in here. Talk about the school they're going, the program, inclusive practices. If they participated in workability, if they participated in TPP or any grant programs or something on the campus that they're doing, you would add that in. Okay, so these are the sections. Transportation, maybe, and I'm so heartbroken. The freedom to go with RTA, if any of you are using that, has been now eliminated out of budget cuts, right? That's where they used to go in, help train the students using the RTA, get them the cards, the Dial-A-Ride card or their card for the RTA. That is no longer, I think it's ending at the end of this month because of COVID-19 and budget cuts. But that used to be something you could talk about. The student participated in Freedom to Go with RTA, or they've applied for the Dial-A-Ride card. Rec and leisure, that's important, being integrated into the community, right? Access to their community, access to peers. If they're involved in, here it was Boy Scouts, anything with their church, you're gonna put that in there. Any other services, agencies, they have guardianship. And then some recommendations, right? And the recommendations are going to be you're going to be pulling out of that, and this will help you align your goals. Just like a school psychologist has recommendations based on their assessments, those recommendations are usually embedded either in the supplementary aids and services or become part of goals, but they're usually embedded somewhere within the IEP because it's based on the assessments. Same here. Any questions on this?
Bryce just asked a question.
Sure.
Was this something we were supposed to be doing in addition to the one in SACE?
There's a transition assessment report in SACE?
No, I think he means just the 2 transition pages within SACE.
Okay. So I don't know the current RCOE policy because that's not my current area. I will tell you across the country, every 3 years now at triennials, this is what is being recommended. Okay, so this wouldn't be something you would do every year. You're going to give an assessment every year and you're going to put those results in, and I'll talk about that in a minute. As far as more of a formal report, it is being recommended that you do this every 3 years. Okay, so hopefully I clarified that answer.
Yeah, and so just to clarify a little further, I will be bringing this to our administration group to discuss whether this is something that we want to make sure that teachers are doing, and maybe even adopt a form for that in the future.
Yeah, because we want to stay current. And this is what about 6 months ago really kind of came out to make sure things were, did I just switch my screen?
Yeah, you stopped share.
Sorry about that. Now you can see it, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Barbara, I
Yeah.
just want to add, I'm glad that you're showing this transition assessment report too. And yeah, S is right. Maybe this is something that we have to discuss with the admin, because I know preschool, they're actually doing that transition assessment when they move to kindergarten. So I think this is really an important topic that we need to figure out for our COE.
Yeah, so just moving forward, there'll probably be some follow-up on that. You know, and usually the SELPA sometimes will create a form and then districts tweak it to their own. Our district kind of creates their format, but just know that that's what's coming, that's what's out there. If the people who said yes, they've done it. I don't know if they're currently doing it or they did it in their district that they're at, but that's awesome. But now you're at least now you're aware of it. You've seen what one looks like and you have access so you can review it and you can start maybe embedding some of that in what you do.
Very good. Thank you.
Oh, that was on. So here's the link. When you click the link, it takes you to it. And again, this was my little IEP meeting. You would then share out when they talk about going over reports and results of reports. And again, the psychologists, some psychologists, especially with the older kids, already have some things embedded that they do. So make sure you're aware of what they're sharing and incorporate that into your report too. All right. So where do you put those results we're just now talking about? On the IEP, on page 1 of the transition plan. This is the top. Then it says results of age-appropriate transition assessments. Describe. Here's the issue. Wow, sorry. People don't see the word results and they just list transition assessments, right? So they will put, gave blah, 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 student questionnaire. And that's all they put. Or they list 2 or 3 assessments. Okay, that's not what it's asking. The box is asking for the results and describe it. So you're going to list the name of the assessment you gave, and then you're going to describe the results. Student style of learning is da 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 da. Student took the blah, blah, blah. Results showed that he had a strong interest in the following careers, and then you list those careers. So you're not writing huge paragraphs, you're listing the assessment you gave and the results. What was the results? Those need to change every year. And there can't just be one. You should have a variety of assessments that you've given based on the needs of the students in the areas that we just talked about, in employment, in training, in independent living, in community, and then put those there. Okay, so I think the box gets bigger when you type. I can't remember. Does there, Amy? The box expands, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it does.
I believe it does when you go to print, it expands. I think when you
Yeah.
type, it stays there. So list it out. It's not 5 paragraphs, but you can keep it simple, but it's the results. Those results need to be there. When we're doing in ed benefits, when I'm pulling files in districts, I'll go in, and that's one of the things I'm looking at, because you start here. These results need to guide what happens next. Okay. Oh, we got a quiz. This is kind of a redundant question. Do you need to save or keep transition assessments?
Okay, you may unmute yourself or use the chat to respond.
Yes.
Oh, good. I figured that was an easy one.
Yes.
All right.
Lots
But
of
that's a question. Yes, you need to keep them. However, right, how long do you keep them? Do you need to keep all of them? That kind of becomes the question. So with RCOE, we have the white binders, right, that where you store, we're still using those, right, as an Amy?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So there is a transition
Yes.
tab, okay, where you can put that, okay, especially when the student is probably in 8th grade. I will tell you that in districts I came from and my experiences, we have a separate transition file for the student because it's going to become thick and big. And so if you have a transition file or you start creating one, you need to put, and here's an example, I'm not going to read it all to you. This is what you need to have in it, right? It's very important that you save those assessments. It's important that you save the transition reports. When you go to, it's just like a speech log, okay? A speech therapist parent calls up and says, I don't think you saw my student or my child last month. Can I see your logs, right? I don't think you did any transition assessments in this area and you knew this was an important area, right? You pull all the information out. It's also helpful when there's a release of information at the very end, when you're doing your summary of performance and the student is transitioning into maybe an adult day community program, they're going off with the Department of Rehab or Inland Regional Center, and they then do their own assessments. Well, you just did a whole bunch of assessments, right? So when you get that release of information and you start sharing, here's the assessments we've already given, here's their strengths, here's their weaknesses, you're tying that in from their transition plan into their summary of performance, and you hand it off to Inland Regional Center, you are saving them some time. They can then take the baton from right where you are and move forward, right? If you basically say, here's the student, and you have just a summary of performance and no assessments, they're going to have to do some more assessments. And those assessments cost lots of money, right? And it holds up the student. Question?
Yes. Before you move on, we do have a participant asking if you could share a completed sample based on the transition assessment report.
Yes. So the previous slide, whoops, right there. When you click that link, it will take you to that transition assessment that I just shared.
Perfect. So we'll be sharing the PowerPoint with all of you.
Yeah, so you'll get the PowerPoint, you'll get the links. Later when we do the assessments, the same thing. It will open up, hopefully it'll open you, if you're outside RCOE, you might have to get permission because they're in my Google Drive, but that won't be a problem. All right. So it's very important, especially if you're adult transition, especially if you're in high school, to start saving those transition assessments and putting them in a file so that you have, once the student graduates, ages out, right, we send the CUME file, we send the special ed file, the transition file into storage where we hold on to it in case something was to ever come back. But it's very important. Now, 99% of the time our students graduate, they don't go to due process, right? You know your families, but we still do best practices for all students no matter what. Okay. All right, so our objective, to articulate the key components of the law surrounding transition assessments. Hopefully we just went over that. Develop skills to write a transition assessment report. So I've given you a sample report to look at. We've talked about it. So that kind of takes care of the legal components of assessment. Now we're going to move on to building our awareness around cultural transition planning. Right now, if you're turning on the TV, you can see that this is a hot topic in our society. Cultural competence. So most of us, if you're an old timer, you have your CLAD. If you before that, there was something else, and I don't know if they still call it a CLAD in the credentialing program, but it's definitely built into getting your credential. But I want to talk a little bit about this, not too much, but it's really, really critical, especially for our adult transition students. And I'll share some of my experiences with that. But this research started, cultural responsiveness has been around for a long time. About 10 years ago, it got very popular, right? We got our unconscious biases training. We have all kinds of things like that going on. And about 5 years ago, I would say the research has really picked up around culture competence in terms of developing a transition plan, right? And what that might look like across our country in the different geographical areas that you live in, and our student population, right? We look at disproportionality in special ed, right? There's a lot that ties into that. And there's this premise that, I'll read you something in a while, but in the last 5 years, there's been a lot of research out there on what this looks like. So I'm going to share just a little bit with you because this really needs to be tying into your transition plans. And I think it's overlooked a lot. When planning for transition, educators are required to consider students' needs, interests, and preferences. We all know that. We all do that. To practice cultural responsiveness in transition planning, one must be introspective about personal beliefs and assumptions while also being intentional in considering other cultures. And I think this is very critical, especially in my own experience. And I'm looking for a piece of paper that I have, hold on. Because if we look at what students, if we look at our adult transition students, especially Hispanic female girls, they are not, and again, I'm talking from my experience because yours might be different. I really struggled in my adult transition program getting the parents to allow them to attend an adult community program. Their idea that once the student aged out, they would continue to live at home and be cared for by family members. And the biggest reason for that was the fear of them being sexually assaulted, which is totally understandable, right? I can't sit there and say, oh, that won't happen. So I have to be careful with that with working with families and try to say, well, why don't you go tour the facility? Why don't you go look to see what the options are? Maybe they could go 1 day a week, right? You kind of have those conversations, but you really need to take in the culture of your students and the things that they're experiencing. And sometimes we overlook that because we get so excited because we have all these inclusive practices and we have all these opportunities that 5-10 years ago we didn't have for students. Students with intellectual disabilities now have access to colleges. They're graduating, they're living in dorms. And that wasn't there 10 years ago. And so that's really important that we start to recognize our own biases and what we want for our students and the students themselves. I always include this because it's twofold. The generational differences, it's between staff, between colleagues, and it's also between our parents. And sometimes I think this gets overlooked too, but we're seeing this more with our families whose younger brother and sister might be in high school and they are becoming the advocate for their little brother or sister in IEP meetings, right? And they might have different beliefs than their parents. So if we look at, okay, we have people, so my staff, I have staff in all of these generations, Generation Z up, right? And I'm right here. So when we're dealing with each other and we're talking to each other, this person got their credential 40 years ago, right? Credentialing programs looks much different than this person, what was embedded. This person might not have had any training on transition planning, only what the district might offer 3 or 4 times a year, right? And what their experiences are. This person, it's maybe more embedded. There might have been 3 or 4 classes on transition planning, right? Also our parents. So my sister-in-law used to live in what was called an institution, but it was actually a state hospital. Wonderful facility. So when people talk about institutions, they have this perception of Bellevue, this horrible experience. Well, that was not my in-laws' experience. That was not Cheryl's experience. It was a beautiful facility in Costa Mesa. It has closed down because of the new laws and being integrated into the community. And so their experience with special ed over the last 50 years is much different than a younger parent, right? Who now the idea is competitive integrative employment, right? So all students, no matter disability, will be assessed to go work, okay? So as educators, we're like, woohoo, yeah, let's get them jobs. That doesn't mean every family wants that, okay? And so we have to recognize that. So you have to kind of find that balance, right? And I want to say the older generation might have different perceptions and beliefs, even with teachers, right? When we talk about inclusive practices, right? Versus a younger teacher, or it could be vice versa. So you have to kind of look at the different generations, because this is the first time in the history that we have this many generations in the workforce, right? So when we're trying to set up a work experience with someone, when we're trying to include our student in a CTE course, right? You have to kind of factor in these things. And sometimes these concepts, the pedagogies around this, get neglected. And I think it's important to just recognize them and make sure we're aware. So our culturally responsive transition practices and planning, these are just reflective things to think about when you're developing a transition plan. Okay, I can go in, meet a student, ask them a couple questions, and probably design a pretty solid transition plan in about 45 minutes, right? Because I've been doing it forever. Pull his information, get some stuff. That doesn't mean it's the best, okay? Because I'm not slowing down and I'm not truly doing best practices and thinking about these other things, right? And sometimes that's what we need to do. So what are characteristics of my personal culture? How does my culture influence my expectation of my students? How does my culture impact how I view students, right? So we have this view of some students, and I will use CTE because we fought for a long time to get students with disabilities into CTE courses. And I still get phone calls today from the School of Education saying, we have a student who is deaf. How could he possibly get a CTE certificate in whatever field it is? And we say he can, and here's how he's going to do it, right? Because they have these perceptions. So students who are blind, students who are deaf, hard of hearing, students in wheelchairs, we really struggle there with placing students in work settings, right? And a lot of times it's because of personal beliefs. I will tell you that when I was an ED teacher many years ago, and we were doing a Thanksgiving feast, again, going back to my personal culture, I developed the menu based on what I had and thinking, well, everybody kind of has this. I knew there'd be some variations. At that particular time, all my students were African American. And macaroni and cheese was something that they all, in different periods, we kind of voted on what we were going to have, and then we would come together. And that was a big learning experience culturally for me. Never had macaroni and cheese for Thanksgiving. And then again, this was probably 15 years ago. And so it just shows you little things like that you don't think about. But to them, they all have it. It was part of their culture. It was part of what they had. So we do much better than we did years ago, I think, with that. But I just wanted to throw that out there and be aware of it. Communicating with students and family. Eye contact is another one, especially in certain cultures, right? It's not that they're being passive. Who's in charge of the family? What is the role of the woman at home in certain cultures, right? Like I talked about going on to a program, and some families, girls just aren't going on. They're staying home. Do you seek the input of the students and their families regarding cultural understanding? So one of the things we did in our program was we did not have, a lot of times the girls were staying home, but we kind of then worked around that. Okay, if they're staying home, how can we then address their needs so that they have a fulfilling life, that they can still self-advocate at home, that they still have access to their community, that they're just not staying home. They're maybe going to church, or they're going in certain clubs, that type of thing. Transition planning. Okay, am I imposing my personal beliefs on my students, right? there is a huge, huge push across the state that all students go to college, right? That they all fill out the FAFSA, that they all have access to money and different things like that for college. And sometimes I've debated this with my colleagues, how I feel about it. I go back and forth. But you kind of have to decide, what does that student want and how do I support that student? Am I creating transition plans prior to gathering direct input? So this goes back to, you have an IEP due, you're cutting and pasting, your schedule's been busy. Are you truly doing all these things and updating the transition plan? Are you taking shortcuts, right? Kind of hold yourself accountable on that. I mean, we all get busy, but do reflect on that. And this last one I think is a really big one, especially if you're an ED teacher. Do I have access to resources, personnel to support my students' goals? Mentors within the community, right? And this is currently like what's going on in the news, right? When I was an ED teacher, we brought in other leaders. We brought in guest speakers who might have been African American, and they were a manager at a company, and they were talking about their life growing up and how they became a manager, our experiences they had. If you have a student with a low incidence disability, maybe a student with dwarfism, maybe you have, and we did this at the RCOE Equity Conference a few years ago. Dina and I presented on low incidence, and we had a teacher who's out in, I believe she's in Beaumont or Banning, and she talked about, she has dwarfism, and she's a teacher, and what that's like being a teacher, and somebody who is blind and somebody who is deaf, being role models and saying, this was my life, this was my experiences, and you can do it too, and here's what helped me. So making sure you're implementing all of that into your programs. That was a lot. Is there any questions on that?
I don't see any in the chat so far.
Okay, well, hopefully you like this. Hopefully I'm just not like rambling on.
No, I think you're being thorough. You're being very thorough.
Webinars are so hard because you're like, okay, if we were in person, I could see if people were engaged. When I'm talking, it's like, am I okay? Do I need to back up? All right, so moving out of that, right? We just met our objective, understand the importance of cultural competence in transition planning, because it does not get a lot of attention, but it's so much embedded, and it's embedded in the success of the student, because no matter how well that plan is written, if the family has a different belief system, it ain't gonna happen. Let's just be honest, right? You gotta get that buy-in, and they gotta have the supports in order to do it. All right, next up, we have connecting person-centered plan. Oh, it says plant, sorry. Gotta fix that. 2 assessments. All right, so who's doing person-centered planning? Anyone?
Can you explain that a little further? Because I think people might, some of our participants, this might be one of the first time they're hearing that term, or they're just unsure because nobody's responding yet.
Well, I am so glad you said that, because I almost forgot to show the video. All right, so let me.
That's what I'm here for.
All right, so I'm going to attempt to show a video. So bear with me a few seconds while I try to do this. Oh, I'm hitting the wrong button. Okay. You guys see the video?
Yes.
Okay. So this video is not my favorite video. The one I really like, I couldn't find, of course. And this guy kind of has a dull voice, but it's cut and dry, no fluff, and it's what you need to hear. So I went with this, and it's 4 minutes.
Into the person's life. Benefits to people have included better jobs, their own place to live, being able to own and drive a car, being able to be self-employed, going to school, and owning a home. The principles of person-centered planning are based upon the importance of individual choice, imaginative and inventive support for those choices, and the ability of the person's support group, along with the person, to take action to implement those choices. The basic principles of person-centered planning are the support of self-determination and personal empowerment, a strengths-based form of information gathering, establishing personal priorities, action planning for goal accomplishment, and using personal networks to enhance success for the person. Now let's talk a little about the specific steps you might want to accomplish in order to provide true person-centered planning. Step number 1, who's on your team? The people who are going to help you are the people you trust the most. These might be family members, teachers or principals, friends, church members, or anyone who's important to you. Step number 2, you pick the place to meet. Where do you feel the most comfortable? What makes you feel good about yourself? In your house? In a favorite restaurant? In the church you attend? The place must be large enough for the people you invite and quiet enough for everyone to be heard. Step number 3, what do you want to change about your life? Let's talk about your strengths. What you like, the places that you like to go, the people you like, where you want to live, what you want to do for a job. Step number 4, gathering information. For this part of the meeting, you and your group will use something called mapping. You'll need large pieces of paper, lots of colored markers, some masking tape, and a large wall to tape up the finished maps. Try not to make lists of words. Use pictures instead. The first map we're going to be talking about is called the background map. Time to tell your life story. Starting with your date and place of birth, draw pictures of important things that happened in your life. You can put them on a timeline in the order that they happened and sort of build a path of your life. This map helps other people understand you and what your experiences have been. If you take a look at the next slide, the background map, you'll notice that my map looks like a life path with arrows in between the important events. The next map you're going to be working with is called the Network or Friends map. This map answers the question, who's important to you in your life? Put a little figure of yourself in the middle of the page and start with those closest to you. Build circles of support of the people you know. The next map is called the Dreams map. What do you want for yourself in your life? It's all up to you in this map. Draw pictures of the things that you want, your own house, car, job, vacation. Draw them with as much detail as you can, and always draw yourself in the picture. Then there's the preferences map. Using this map, you'll be able to tell the group what's important and motivating to you and what you'd like to stay away from. On one side of the map says what works, and the other side what doesn't. The picture shows a written list, but it would be better still if you could draw the picture. Establishing priority. From the Dreams map and using the information from the other maps, establish priorities for action. Priorities may address a work goal directly or may describe a path to a work goal. Action planning. Describe the initial 5 steps that lead to goal accomplishment. Dreams become goals during this process. Networking the members of your support group. People in the support group may use their personal networks in support of accomplishing your goals. Some of the ways that networking helps. They can connect you with people you don't know who can help you, and they can connect you directly to your goal. Employers, real estate agents, and car dealers. At the end of the initial meeting, plans should be made to reconvene in a second meeting within the next 2 weeks. Never more than a month. You want to keep that group together and working for you all the time.
Oh. Okay.
We got the pretty slide.
Okay. Oh, there we go. All right. So I'm going to back up a little bit and thank you for asking that question. Person-centered planning has been around for a while. It's also called person-driven plans. And it looks very similar no matter what the student's disability is. If you wanted to do it for yourself, you could call it a vision board, right? So what best practices would be, this is kind of the perfect timing to think about it and think about how you would want to implement it in your classroom. And it does not matter the grade level for this, right? So let's just focus on at the high school level for a moment. And we do this in our TPP classes too. So what happens is you can make it individual. You can start as a whole class session, just like the video talked about, like a dream section. And it's really, if you're into arts and crafts, you're going to love it. If you're not that much into poster boards, you could do it a different way. There are templates online that you can Google and print out and fill out. So it's kind of up to you how you want to do it with students. But basically you get a piece of paper and you start talking about what are your interests? What are the things you're good at, right? What are your hobbies? What do you have access to in the community? And then you can start to see where the barriers are. You can start to see where there's obstacles, and you can also start to see strengths. Okay, what works? And so especially for older students, and maybe they're very involved in the church. Well, the church is a great place to meet other people who work, right? So maybe at the church, there is somebody that you know owns a car dealership or owns a beauty salon or works at a beauty salon. And this student wants to go into cosmetology. Maybe they can get a paid work experience there, right? So that's how you start to network off of their person-centered planning. Okay, so again, doesn't matter. The more severe the disability, the more a team approach the plan is. You would have a lot of interviewing with the parent. You would have a lot of discussions with the parent. So if you did this with your students at the start of the year, right, and maybe you develop, and if you Google and look for images for person-centered planning, you will see a lot of pictures that look like the one I've just posted, right? So teachers do this, but sometimes they do this and that's it, right? And so this is a form of assessment. It's a form of gathering a bunch of information, and then the next step, though, is taking that information, doing assessments, and then tying it back to the transition plan. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So here's two different examples of connecting the dots. So the school year has started. I've sat down with a student. We've done some person-centered planning. Okay, this particular student, I'm going to say, is going to live at home. He has more of a severe disability. He wants to live at home. Parents want him to continue to live at home. Okay. I'm looking for my arrow. There we go, sorry. So we know that from his person-centered plan, right? He drew a little house, he has his room. But what does that mean? What's the next step? Well, if he lives at home, perhaps he needs to work on the budget. So we can do assessments or transition assessments around budget. What's the strengths and weaknesses there? We can do assessments around self-care. Okay, how's the hygiene looking, right? Things like that, self-advocacy. We can do assessments around transportation. Okay, maybe the student is able to access the brother's apartment. Maybe the brother lives a couple miles away and he's going to be taking Dial-A-Ride, or he's able to go to the mall, right? So the person-centered plan starts here, and then you break out from there areas where there might be barriers or obstacles where you want to do some assessments and build the next step to their transition plan.
We have a question.
Sure.
Bryn, would you unmute yourself? I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question real well.
Hi, Bryn.
Hey, no, I was just, because I've seen these before, but it usually was something that like the students' whole community comes together for. So that's why I was like, I've never seen one done in class. I've always seen like teachers go to the house with the family and with their friends and other community members. And so that's why I was like, when you were saying that it was mostly just connecting with the parents, I love the idea of these meetings, and I've seen these meetings before, but I just have always thought that there were a big group of people involved with the child, not necessarily just the teacher and the child done in class. So I thought, I was just asking, isn't this usually something that more of the friends and the family and all the community members that are involved come together to work with the child and to highlight like what they want and how they can accommodate the child to make those goals?
Okay. Yeah. So it's both. There is no right answer. So usually how this developed was out of adults, right, in adult day community programs after they have left, and you work with different interagencies. And when we went to competitive integrated employment, and when the funding has changed for students once they graduate and what those adult community programs look like, person-centered planning got much more popular because they're really looking at networking. They're really looking at how the student can access their community to the fullest extent possible independently. And you can Google some videos on that. They're there and you can watch those. But if you backtrack that, you can do it at any grade with your students, right? So for example, my husband's a 7th grade social studies teacher, and one of his lessons every year is a life map. And the students do a chart and they talk about their life up until 7th grade, what has happened to them. And it's very interesting because you'll see dad went to prison or this person died, and it kind of maps out their life, and you get to really know a lot about the student, right? This is the same concept of that. Person-centered planning you can do at any different level. There is no, oh, it only works for this. How you interpret it, and you do it in like a class lesson, right? Lesson planning in your classroom as part of your instruction is you're getting to know the student. You're getting to know the strengths and weaknesses of the student. And again, it depends on the more severe the student, right? The more services a student might have. It would be more of a bigger production usually when the student graduates, right? In school, you can still do it. You don't have to. If you're looking at, let's talk about trying to include a student in a classroom. Okay, what are the supports that student has, let's say he has a low incidence disability, he's in a wheelchair, he has some bathroom needs, maybe he has an LVN, the student's going to be mainstreamed, included in 3 classes a day, right? You kind of can use some person-centered planning for that. His goal next year is to be in a certain classroom. Okay, how's he going to access the campus? How are things? You can do that with person-centered planning, right? If a student has a dream or desire for something, he wants to get his driver's license is a big example. Okay, let's map that out. What does that look like, right? So it's a way of mapping. It's a way of finding out what the strengths are the student has in their life and what the barriers are and how we can get around those. And then assessments then tie back into those so that you're assessing and tying it back into their transition plan to help the student. I just don't, a lot of people do a form of person-centered planning, but they don't do anything with it. They just do it, they present it like the student did this mapping, but then they don't tie it into an actual assessment. And so that was my point today. So you can take it, there's no wrong answer. In a school setting, we don't usually bring in so many people to do a person-centered plan. It's a little bit more informal. It's usually just you and the student, and it could be you and the parent where you send it home as homework, right? It's like, okay, so like right now we're doing distance learning. You could totally do this a lesson with your family, right? You provide some markers or crayons and piece of paper, and together they develop a plan. And just like the video had different areas, you could focus on their dreams for the next year, or where they see themselves, or what they think their strengths are, and you can do it that way. So hopefully that answered your question. So there is no right or wrong. The very formal elements do happen though when the students, usually after they leave high school. So that was one example. Another example of using it, like in our TPP classes, we use it. So for example is students get a sheet of paper. A lot of times on these, there's already, if you Google, there's already a form filled out with strengths, weaknesses, career choices. It's a little more structured. The graphics are already there for the student. They take some assessments and they fill out the form. So if a student wants to go to a college or vocational school, maybe that's on their plan, right? I like to have my mouse, sorry. They know they want to go to college or a vocational school. They don't know what they want to study. Okay, so that's where you tie in assessments. You go to the different college career assessments that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. They take some stuff, answer some questions, it generates a report, and it says this is the type of field based on your interests, and then the student goes back and researches those. That's how you tie it back into the transition plan. Same with mental health issues, any type of soft skills issues. The student has anger issues, right? He wants to go to college, however, he's been in lots of fights, he's got different anxiety issues. Okay, you do some assessments around that, and then you tie that back into the transition plan. I just like to, sometimes people do things in isolation, And I want to make sure that assessments are not just randomly pulled out of a drawer where it's here, take this assessment, I'm going to write it up. There has to be a purpose and objective, and it has to all be connected. And person-centered planning is one way where you can help determine what assessments are appropriate for the student. So hopefully that answered your question. If not, let me know. Hopefully that made sense. All right.
Silence means that everything's good.
So that means I checked out or it's all good. Hopefully it's all good. All right. So here's the part you came for. Here's the part where everybody's like, okay, can you show me where the assessments are? All right. Objective met. Develop skills to connect person-centered plans to assessment. Hopefully we've done that. The next part is our resources. And so I'm going to go back to my, hopefully. I think I'm getting better. All right. Yes, you can see that?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to go through each of these. So in education, right, we don't believe in recreating the stuff. If a district, somebody's already done something, we borrow it. We use it. What we don't do is steal it. So that is one of my pet peeves. Along in my research, you will see on every page where resources came from. I do not like when I go to a presentation and then 3 weeks later I see another presentation and somebody cut and stole somebody else's resources and didn't give them credit. So I've kept the websites here so you know where I got them from. In the last month and a half, 2 months, I will say it has been a huge information sharing network for transition plan. Every grant program, every transition college program out there has done a fabulous job sharing their resources. And sometimes it's too much, right? You get overwhelmed. And so if you could just take away a couple things, if you had a couple go-to, that's really all you need to start. And so I pulled out what I consider the best of the best, and they're inundated with resources. So this first one, and a lot of these come from back east, because back east, they're ahead of us. So most of these are from out of state somewhere. So
would any of these be useful, or not useful, but accessible for like MOVE students or students with orthopedic and severe cognitive impairment? Yes?
Yes, so we're going to talk about that on some of these because they're broken down for you. So I have for you one, I think we have about 5 websites we'll go to, and each website is embedded. And you can see right here, just on this website alone, they've ours for education, they have middle school, right? The high school diploma track, high school certificate plaque, life skills, bam, it's there. So we'll just click on this first, and I'm going to give you an example. Things that are difficult for me. Oh, what does that look like? So I click on it. It's printable. It's going to take a second to open. I'm lying. What happened to it? Where'd it go?
I wonder if you have to refresh your page.
Oh, maybe.
Oh, wait.
Let's see if the next one opens. I practiced and all these worked. Okay, there we go. Okay, so here's study habits questionnaire, right? So this would be something you would give a student. And in that box on the IEP on page 1, I gave the study habits questionnaire. The results showed whatever the results showed, right? So these are already developed for you. Most of them tell you if they're just yes, no, you total it up. Share the results. There's some on here. I think, let me see if that one. Oh, here we go. So you can see what they look like. You can print them and create your own files. You can create your own Padlet. What's your learning style? This is for certificate track, right? All the questions are there. How to score it, information is down there. These are all free. Post-secondary school comparison, let's see what that one is. Right, you fill out these forms, you turn them in. There are some transition assessments that are very expensive, and there I'll show you those. And if your district has money, you have money, you can purchase those. If you're looking to assess in the area of employment, okay, if you're a life skills student, here might be some, and most of these you got to remember are checkoffs. And maybe this is something you send to the parent and the parent completes or the caregiver completes. And then you would note that. And you would note it based on your observations with the student, working with the student, interviewing the family.
Barbara, all of these resources, this website is linked into your PowerPoint, right?
Yes.
Perfect.
I'll show you that in a minute. All right. So I don't want to spend too time because you can explore all these. Independent living, bam. There's all these assessments, right? So you can see you have a wealth of resources right here. You play around with them. You know your student population, right? You know what students you have coming in. So if you have 10 or 15 students, well, I don't think anybody has 15, but let's say around 10 to 12 students, you know your grade level, you can start going into these websites, printing them, downloading, putting them in a Google folder, and then you have them ready to go for the year. So that's one website. And you have links to all these websites. This is probably by far my favorite website. I kind of didn't want to share this website. I wanted to hoard it. So here's why I like it.
No hoarding allowed.
I know. It's like, why would I hoard it? I don't have students. It's for everybody. It's kind of like finding a discovery at the store. All right. So I'm going to uncheck these real quick. This is just fabulous when I came across this website. All right. So I want to look at independent living for my student. My student is, and even if they're over grades 11, 12, they could be adult. I'm going to check that box. And the student has autism. Bam. These would be the assessments that come up as being appropriate. And then all I do, AIR self-determination scale, and it gives you a little blurb and you click on it and then it takes you to all these forms. And some of the forms are in Spanish. So this website, you could spend hours, you can get lost in it. It has all these free assessments. Some of them can go to the parents. Some have already been, are in Spanish. Let me go back. Okay. And right here, it has the disabilities. So you check the area, education and training. Maybe I have a 8th grader who is ED. And then these are what comes up. Make sense? I wish I saw everybody shaking their head.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's see, Teresa Koppel says, we need that for DHH students. That is amazing.
DHH right there. The student is ED and DHH. He is in, we want to look at employment, and let's say he's a 9th, 10th grader. Bam. There are the resources. And then once you click on it, then again, it takes you, how do I advocate for myself? Let's just pick that one. You go there, and then there's the form you can fill out. Some are actual true assessments. Some are forms. Some are for parents. Okay, this one is 19 questions about work choices and work environments. Oh, geez, I hate when it takes me to, I don't know, it took me, I don't want to go there. So when you click on them, it'll take you, you play around and figure those out. We like that one? It is by far my favorite. So now you have this one, South Bend. Then you have Indiana. Next, you have a list. There's difference between formal and informal assessments. This list is more ones you would that are not free. Some are not, but they're broken down. Achievement tests. These would probably be given like the Woodcock-Johnson, the Wyatt, RSP type students. Adaptive behavior skills, right? So you can Google the names of these. Most of these are given by psychs, but not all, just those there. General and specific aptitude tests, right? ONET, I already shared with you. It was on one of the slides. You can Google these. Some of them have a paid section, some have a free section. So you can look at that. Interest inventories, right? Those usually are free. And those usually are check boxes. So you can look at these, you can Google the names of them, download them, put them in a file. Intelligence tests, again, you wouldn't be giving those, psychs would be giving those, but you could ask your psychologist, hey, which intelligence tests do you give, if any, and is there a transition component built in? Personality, right here, there's some tests on that. Agency planning, there's a form for that. Career development. So you have access to this too. On-the-job training evaluation, self-determination. These are all the names of more formal assessments that you can Google and research. So I'm going to pretend everybody's nodding their head going, cool.
I think they are.
All right. This next thing you have access to is, I like this. This is again adopted by out of Washington. It has grade 8 because usually that's where transition planning starts. A little bit of a timeline here of what you might be doing, what it might look like. So you can look at that. Then it talks about the cycle of the IEP, right? Today we really only focused on transition assessments, right? You can see all these other components that are part of the transition plan. We only took one slice of that pie. All right, bam, formal and informal transition assessments. This is what you waited for me to talk 45 minutes till you got to, right? Interests, formal and informal, right? So over here it has the links to the websites, whether it's something a little more formal, whether it's something a little more informal, okay? And then the type. So this is interests. Career cruising is a very popular one. If you're in an LEA, most schools use that. Don't have to be special ed for that. It's in most career classes. Aptitude tests right here, what you should be looking at. And again, thinking about your transition folder for the student, making sure you have various assessments, right, in different parts. So here, oh, I haven't given anything in this area. What would that look like? Here's what it looks like. Here's some resources. Preferences right here. All right, then it goes down and it kind of, they did a nice job thinking in 7th grade, what would be some appropriate resources in 8th grade, right? As you can see, career cruising is across the board. You just have to be careful that you're not using career cruising every single year, and that's the only thing you put in there, right? It has to show, just like your goals, just like anything else in present levels, you got to kind of update that. So bam, all these blue links take you. There's 9th grade, interests, aptitudes, preferences. You can click on those links. Now this, you got to remember, sometimes links change, right? Sometimes they take you to an inappropriate site. So because it has changed. So you got to be careful with that. But you want to test out the sites. You want to look at the ones you want, and then you want to create your own Google transition folder for what's appropriate for your students. 11th grade, 12th grade, and then additional planning. All right, you like? Yes, Barbara, we like. It's fabulous.
Yes, Barbara, it's very nice. And I can't wait to look at this document. I'm excited.
I couldn't get to my mute button fast enough.
I've been using sign language the whole time, but I'm all into it.
Oh,
I'm excited about that Indiana page because I want to see what the DHH has. I want to see if they have other kind of things. So thank you for sharing that.
So I just want to remind the group that yes, we are going to share the PowerPoint and we are recording this webinar. It will be in the professional development Google Classroom. And I will also email a copy of this PowerPoint to participants. I took a screenshot of the list of participants. If you are outside of RCOE, please send me a private message with your email address and I will include you in that email.
All right, so here's all the ones I shared. I shared 4 pages, and if I feel like it doesn't seem like a lot, but I'm telling you, it's the best of the best. Oh, I missed one. I think there's one other thing on here. And it is just the Indiana one. I'm telling you, you can spend an entire week, right? You can get caught up in it. And so that's what you have to be careful for, is really after you've done a person-centered planning or some conversations with your students and you're looking to what areas do I need to assess, where do I need to build my own toolbox, my own portfolio around assessments, and then you can go to these websites, and that way you're a little more focused. Otherwise you're just, unless you have nothing to do and sitting in your pool, you can click on different links, right? It becomes overwhelming. So you really kind of want to stay focused, pull the resources that you need, and become familiar with the assessment tool. Know what it's asking, know how the student needs to fill it out, know how to score it, know how to write it up. and then take the next step into writing that transition plan. And so again, all those links should work. And they're all right there to take you to those websites. So we met that objective. We did so good today. Differentiate between the different types of transition assessments. And we talked about the formal and informal. Locate appropriate transition materials. I gave you 4 of the best websites that are embedded with tons of resources. And I thank you. Now you go out and do it.
Hey, Barbara, I just have a quick question because I know we have a few teachers from our lab program. I feel like I know you have showed like this form for, it's like an interest survey. And I think those things like their study habits and all that, even though it's not really an assessment, but just to get some information from our students who are really verbally capable of telling their interests would be a good idea to use in our program. Am I correct? Can we use that one?
And I would say they are assessments. So don't underestimate an assessment, right? Just because it's not a Wyatt or a Woodcock Johnson, a formal assessment, most transition assessments are questionnaires. They're filling out the blanks. They're completing some type of survey. And then you're taking that information and then you're going to the next step with it. So remember, just don't try to remember that that's why in the IEP box, it says questionnaire, interest inventory, because that's what most transition assessments are.
All right.
And you can use any kind, it doesn't matter. So if the student, especially in the, let's say the ED, very articulate, right? That you might have more on mental health. You might have more on what are their triggers. You might have more on soft skills. What areas do they need in anger management or communication so that they can become successful in college, in the workplace?
Okay.
That's what's going to generate your goals.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else have questions?
Everything got really quiet all of a sudden.
I know. I was like, are you there? Oh, you know what? Can I stop sharing and see people?
Yeah. Are we done with your presentation?
That's it. That was my thank you slide. That was.
So Barbara, I just wanted, I know we talked about having different, 2 other professional developments like this, and we have not yet scheduled, but I think maybe that report writing would be really useful for people.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can talk about scheduling that later. If you can just send me the information, I will make sure it gets uploaded into the Google Classroom and emailed to those people who participated today directly so that they have it in their hand. And if you guys have any questions, please speak up.
You can always email me if something comes up. Just know it'll take me 2 or 3 days sometimes to respond to you. And then just send me another email saying, hey, where are you? You won't bug me. Trust me, you won't.
All right. We're going to hold you to that.
Not a problem. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed it. I hope you at least got 1 or 2 things out of it. If nothing else, you got a bunch of resources.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Barbara. And we'll see everybody later. Thank you guys for joining us.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you, Barbara. Bye.
Welcome.